Indicted former Trump aide Roger Stone. He was back in court today, facing a judge who's considering a gag order, a decision that could seriously upend this case. What would that mean? Well, today the judge stressed if she does rule to gag Stone, he still has free speech rights to discuss like immigration or foreign relations or even Tom Brady, she mentions, but not discuss this case. The judge also made some comments that seemed to lean against Stone, noting, quote, "This is a criminal proceeding and not a public relations campaign." But Stone is arguing he must mount exactly that kind of PR campaign to defend himself and to prevent people, he says, from thinking any silence would mean that he's guilty.
I believe that in the current atmosphere, when one is accused of wrongdoing and one has no response, either is not available or doesn't comment, there's a presumption of guilt that perhaps is unfair but very real.
We're also learning today that Bob Mueller's team is game for an October trial. The judge says summer might make more sense. Stone left the courtroom and again flashed his Nixon victory sign. And in this new interview with the New York Times, meanwhile, Donald Trump is insisting he never talked to Roger Stone about WikiLeaks.
Did you ever talk to him about WikiLeaks? Because that seemed to be what Mueller was. You never had a conversation with him.
No,
okay.
I didn't.
Okay. And did you ever tell him? Did you ever tell him to, or other people to get in touch with him?
Never did.
Okay.
Never did. That's an interesting defense on the record. Then this interview gets really interesting. It touches on a huge question in the Russia probe. Could Donald Trump be a target? You may recall that was a sticking point in President Trump's famous letter about firing James Comey, where Trump oddly wrote to Comey that he alleged Comey told him, "I greatly appreciate you informing me on 3 separate occasions that I am not under investigation." Now Trump claims Comey's boss, Rod Rosenstein, has also made a similar claim to Trump's attorneys.
Has Rod Rosenstein given you any sense over the course of the last year about whether you have any exposure either in, or there's any concerns, or whether you're a target of either Mueller?
Well, he told the attorneys that I'm not a subject. I'm not a target of. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. Now look, whether that claim is true or not, it's fascinating. If it's true, it means Mueller's boss had some reason at some point to tell Team Trump the Russia probe is not headed towards Trump. If it's false, it means Trump is publicly misquoting Mueller's boss, the person overseeing the probe, which could get the attention of that boss, Rod Rosenstein, as well as Mueller himself. Now, of course, cynics might say, hey, Ari, Trump is always claiming people told him he's not a target, just like, as we just discussed, he did with Comey. So what is all this? But note in the new interview, the same New York Times interview, Donald Trump doesn't make that same claim or assurance about not being a target in another investigation, the one by federal prosecutors in New York, which some of Trump's closest allies said very much this week. They said it is a bigger threat to him than Mueller.
Did he say that about the SDNY investigation, too?
About which?
The SDNY investigation? Because there's 2. There's Mueller and then there's the Cohen.
I don't know about that.
Okay.
That I don't know about.
Ron, has anyone said anything to you about whether you're a target at all in terms of what they were looking for on Cohen? Has that ever come up?
No, I don't. We didn't discuss it.
I'm joined by former federal prosecutor Paul Butler, Morgan Peckmay, who directed the documentary Get Me, Roger Stone, which of course shows Stone's long history inside the Republican Party and his longtime work with Donald Trump, and Shelby Holliday, who's been reporting on Stone and the Russia probe and many of these key witnesses for the Wall Street Journal. Paul, what do you think of Donald Trump, who cynics, as I mentioned, may say, who cares what he says? But he's got a very different answer there about being a target in the Mueller probe and what he's been told versus SDNY, and do you believe any of it?
I don't believe the president, in part because he wasn't coherent even yesterday. At first he said that Rod Rosenstein had directly told him that he was a target, and then he said, well, maybe he told my lawyers, and the reporter asked, well, when? He couldn't remember. So there's a specific definition in the Department of Justice handbook, which I looked at every day when I was a prosecutor. A target is someone who is about to be indicted. The specific phrase is when the prosecutor has substantial evidence linking him to the commission of a crime. Almost certainly in the Southern District, Donald Trump, or Individual A, as the prosecutors there like to call him, is a target of that investigation. In fact, the only reason he wasn't charged with campaign finance violations along with Michael Cohen is because he's the president of the United States.
And why do you think Donald Trump is always bringing up whether or not he's a target? You know, there's other ways to handle this, which is, I didn't do anything wrong. We'll let the investigation play out. They'll find the facts. Instead, he's always like, I sort of interceded and I had an inappropriate conversation and I was assured I'm not a target.
Yeah, maybe because he did do something wrong and he doesn't want the investigation to proceed. So this is a way of really embracing his formal status as president as a defense,
right,
since he knows better than anybody else that the policy of the Department of Justice is that a sitting president can't be indicted. After office is another thing.
Morgan, when you set out to make the documentary of Roger Stone, you obviously knew he would be a central figure as the potential agent or linchpin to collusion and would be indicted, and this would be, keeping you busy, right?
Well, no, not at all.
You saw all that coming.
In 2011, I had my crystal ball.
But you set out to profile someone that many of us, that Shelby knows, that I know as a reporter side, that Paul knows on the legal political side, because he's always around. And you have a portrait of a man there. And while he's criticized for many things, in some ways the documentary is at least sympathetic or shows some of his what we would call strengths. One of them is certainly persistence. I mean, anyone who knows Roger knows that. Let's take a look at that, his resilience, how he identifies that with Nixon, and think about that in this battle today in the Mueller courtroom. Take a look.
His greatest single quality is resilience, and that's the purpose of my tattoo. It's not an ideological statement. It's a reminder that in life, when you get knocked down, you have to get back up off the canvas and keep pushing, get back in the game. That's the story of Nixon. A man is not finished when he is defeated. He's only finished when he quits.
How does that apply to the Stone we saw in court today, fighting any potential gag order?
I mean, Stone is as tenacious as they come. He is not going, even if he is convicted, he is not going to give up. He is going to fight this tooth and nail to the bitter end. And if he were to go to prison, he will come out of prison a firebrand and fight it, relitigate it all over again.
Do you admire that?
I think it is one of the characteristics of Roger that has kept him so important in our politics for so long.
Because he does not go away.
He does not go away. He is the cockroach of American politics.
And he's looking at 10 years if he's convicted at least, which means he would be 77. So we'll see how much of a firebrand he is then. That's why I think he's probably going to make a deal.
You think he could crack?
He doesn't have a defense, Ari. The defense to false statements is I told the truth. And Robert Mueller has a whole cadre of text messages and emails which suggest that Roger Stone did not tell the truth.
Shelby, in that line, let's look at what Paul Manafort said that I think a lot of the folks on that side of the team probably wish he didn't say, which is that Stone and Trump are so interconnected, you can't even tell them apart. I say this to you for your analysis on a night when Roger Stone's involvement is being limited as Donald Trump rushes to the New York Times. I guess they're not fake news tonight.
Right.
And is trying to convince the New York Times, he really doesn't know much about what Stone's up to. Take a look at Manafort.
Roger's, relationship with Trump has been so interconnected that it's hard to define what's Roger and what's Donald. While it will be clearly a Trump presidency, I think it's influenced by a Stone philosophy.
So I have to say, when I watched your documentary for the first time, I actually wrote that quote down along with a few other quotes because it just blew my mind, knowing what we know and seeing where we are now, that Paul Manafort and Donald Trump are the two people in your video that are speaking on behalf of Roger Stone. That quote is very interesting, and it's true. Roger Stone has known President Trump for more than 40 years. He's been at his side for some of his most pivotal decisions and moments in life, especially when it comes to politics. I think that Stone will continue to fight, and I think he plays this public-private persona very well. When you're reading accounts in court today where he was pretty quiet, he sat there with a pretty straight face. But we saw a press conference yesterday where he's out there saying my only crime is supporting President Donald Trump, which is obviously not true. That's not what he's charged with. But he has all of these talking points. The deep state's out to get me. He doesn't want to talk about the charges. He wants to talk about the raid on his home, the use of force, all of these things that are inappropriate and being done to him. In many ways, he's very good at making himself look like a victim. And I think that is in part why he's able to raise money for his legal fees. and get writers to write on behalf of him. He works with all of these little InfoWars writers who will write stories that he wants to write. We even reported that Robert Mueller was investigating a story he planted about his alleged back channel, Randy Credico. He has a media operation, and he knows how to spin things better than anyone else. So I think it'll be fascinating if there is no gag order. I mean, continue to see classic Stone. But even if there is a gag order, I think he will have a way of getting his narrative out there, even if he's not the one doing it.
In fairness to Stone and any defendant, whatever one thinks of them, don't you think there's a good argument against a gag order, Paul?
Well, what the judge said is that he's welcome to say whatever he wants in private, and other people are welcome to say whatever they want in public. It's just that Roger Stone and his lawyers need to be circumspect.
Yeah, but let me push you on that. This isn't a normal case. It is obviously all being covered every night. All of us in the media are covering it. The political forces are debating it back and forth. Why should Stone, who has his neck in the potential meat cleaver here, be the one who's not allowed to mount a public defense?
The concern is about infecting the jury pool, which would mean that he might not get a fair trial. Right now, Roger Stone is acting as his own hype man. And again, he's going to the court of public opinion because I don't think he has a defense in the court of law. But to show
I feel you on that, and you never want to be your own hype man. You want to do the verse, and you want someone else to, to echo it. But, except Busta Rhymes, he would famously record his own echoes, and that was like a signature style. But I'm going to keep pressing you on behalf of Roger Stone's argument, which is the Mueller folks put out on Friday what they were doing. Certain cameras showed up there and the raid. And it's all out there. So if you're worried about, yes, tainting the jury pool, which I take your point, you always make serious legal points, is a real legal concern, he would argue, his lawyers are going to argue to this judge, they're being tainted in the other direction already.
Yeah, so what we have is two values that are in some tension. One is the necessity of him having a fair trial and the judge's duty to ensure that that trial is fair. The other is his First Amendment right to express himself. And so the judge balanced that. She, I think, will almost certainly slap a gag order on him. She did. You
predict a gag order.
Absolutely.
And that's what happened to Manafort. Do you have a view of whether this is a good idea?
I think this is really shrewd of Roger, right? Because if he has a gag order imposed upon him, it will play into his narrative of him being persecuted by the government.
Right.
And
do you have a view of whether it's a fair thing to do?
I don't think that there should be a gag order on him. I think he should be able to express it.
So you think there's a good argument for one. You're against it.
I am not a legal expert, but what I should say is that
it's never stopped anyone on television before, Morgan.
Well, I try not to speak about things I don't know, but all I can say is that Roger's already made his point to the public. Yeah. He's made this argument about him being persecuted by the deep state, and he's also made a very pointed statement to the president saying, we did have many conversations. I may speak about that at one point.
Right.
And so I feel like he's made his case. A gag order will only help him.
I don't have a take on the gag order, but I do think that he, like I said, he'll continue to get his narrative out there no matter what, even if it doesn't go through him. I think his comments about the president, you played a clip on your show earlier this week. He seems to know that President Trump told Mueller that the two never discussed WikiLeaks. And President Trump told the New York Times yesterday he never discussed WikiLeaks with Roger Stone. If that is not true, that would be such a strange thing for both of them to lie about unless there's more there. Because the president has said this, as the Journal reported with Michael Cohen. I didn't make the payment. We didn't talk about it. And then it comes out in plea deals and reporting that they actually did discuss it, and President Trump ordered him to go make this payment to a porn star. If that's the case in the Roger Stone saga, we have no idea. We have no evidence proving that it is. That would suggest it would play out in a similar way that the Michael Cohen plea deal played out.
What Shelby told us earlier, I think you actually do have a perspective, because you said essentially that Donald Trump, the president of the United States, is now auditioning for the role of Roger Stone's hype man. Again, the president yesterday complained about the circumstances of Roger Stone's arrest. So the judge would, I'm sure, love to gag the president of the United States. She can't do that. So we can continue to serve that hype function.
Is that a legal fantasy fiction part of this plot? That's one thing I can legally say is unlikely to happen.
Well, and don't forget the tweet from President Trump that called Roger Stone, or praised him for having guts because he said he would never testify against the president. So President Trump has already weighed in on this.
Well, I think that's where there's some overlap. You have the gag order debate. We're going to be watching it closely. It matters a lot. But what guys have both said that's significant is you have people in power in the White House, and now Roger Stone, not saying we'll tell the truth because it's good for us, but rather we're going to criticize law enforcement and avoid testifying as if that is a good thing. And if you don't have anything to hide, that never makes any sense. Shelby Holliday Morgan and Paul Butler, thanks to each of you. Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.